I am a 21-year-old man who was sent to boarding school at the age of 9. According to my parents, it was to provide me with the greatest education possible. They gave everyone the same explanation, and I received the same explanation. They simply didn't want to cope with parenting a child, which is the reality, which I only learned much later. They casually mentioned to a few family members that they needed a vacation, but nobody took it seriously enough to contest. I heard nothing from anyone. I can still recall the day they left me. Early September was the time. My father parked the vehicle. After my mom signed a few documents, they were back in the car and driving shortly after. They didn't even give me a tour of the facility. Another guy who had been there for a year stayed in the same room as me that first night. He said very little. I sobbed beneath the covers till I nodded off. In the hopes that they might call, I continued to stare at the school phone near the hallway entrance. They didn't. They may have phoned once every several weeks over the first year. At times, it lasted only a few minutes. They occasionally went more than a month without calling. After supper, I would wait by the phone room in case they attempted. I was advised by the personnel not to get my expectations up too high. After a time, I gave up waiting. The school was of the highest caliber. That is what I'll offer them. Excellent facilities and well-funded initiatives. Educators who were concerned. However, it quickly became apparent that this was only a short-term issue for the majority of the other pupils. Their family would fetch them up at Easter or Christmas. When summer arrived, the dorms would be vacant. By the time I was 11, I was already familiar with the routine, so I remained behind. The campus was almost deserted over the holidays. Some of us stayed because we were foreign-born children or because we had no visitors. Even if the dorm managers occasionally planned board games or movies, it never seemed like enough. When no one was there, you could hear how silent the hallways become. One of my professors made a mistake when I was 13. She asked me if I had ever been to the city where my parents had relocated when we were discussing cities. I didn't know what she was discussing. I believed that we were still in the same town. When she realized what she had said, she froze and attempted to ignore it. To phone the sole number I had on file, I proceeded to the administrative office. It wasn't linked. Over the next week, I sent 3 emails. Nobody answered. I quit trying when I was 15. On visiting days, I no longer waited. A few members of the school personnel discreetly intervened after seeing. I was able to secure a part-time work at the library with the assistance of one of the sports coaches. That year, I had a birthday cake baked by another instructor. I believe they knew, even if they never said it openly. They each made an effort. Summer vacations were used to work and keep occupied. I enrolled in extra classes, completed research projects, and joined enrichment activities. Since home was no longer an option, it was simpler than returning home. Many individuals inquired about my whereabouts throughout the break. I just stated that I would be there for a senior year academic assignment. I was now among the best pupils in my class. I was chosen to be the track team's captain. My applications to colleges were excellent. When the graduation invitations were printed, the staff assisted me in making adjustments. I mailed one to the given address. I had no response. The day of graduation arrived. Everyone was packing cars, snapping pictures, and giving their families hugs. My baggage was waiting for me at the gate. I spent over 4 hours outside. People ceased inquiring about the arrival of others. The headmaster eventually left, gave me a memorable look, and offered to take me to the train station. Throughout the voyage, we kept to ourselves. He paid for the ticket himself and gave me a bottle of water. What my parents were unaware. Nobody was aware that I had previously organized my getaway during my senior year. I had saved every cent by working 3 part-time jobs. I signed the contract on my own after finding an inexpensive apartment close to my college campus. I never expressed my desire to be persuaded out of it to the school personnel. I didn't search for anyone when I got off the train. I headed directly for the apartment. There was a lockbox with the keys waiting. I placed the mattress on the floor, unloaded my stuff, and sat quietly. That night was the first time I became aware that I was no longer a student. I was also no one's son. Not at all. I started at 0, simply a person in a blank room. But at least nobody was going to leave me this time. Although difficult, the first semester of college was tolerable. I attended early morning classes to open up time for side jobs, worked long shifts in the dining hall, and kept to myself. I just brought a suitcase, some clothing, old notes I used to roll up mattresses, and a secondhand desk from a buy and sell board when I moved out of boarding school. I primarily ate rice with canned veggies and peanut butter sandwiches. I had no higher expectations. I sat down to write a letter one evening following a lecture. I included some of my graduation pictures in the envelope after printing them out. Just that I had graduated, transferred to college, and desired some sort of closure was all I wrote. Any justification, I sent it to the only address I had ever been aware of. The mail returned 3 weeks later, red moved and stamped. There is no forwarding address. I brought the letter to the office of the college counselor. When I described my predicament, the woman at the front desk appeared perplexed. No communication with relatives, no one to call in case of an emergency, no assistance. For about an hour, the counselor sat with me and asked kind questions. She then went over how I could file for independent student status and legal emancipation to keep my financial assistance while the paperwork was being completed. I took up more shifts. Weekends are spent at the campus bookshop, a delivery app at night. I sold some of my old school supplies to textbooks for freshmen. A calculator that is little used. I'd even outgrown a suit. I made it through the following 2 months thanks to it. I kept a diary in which I recorded everything utilized coupons and missed meals. Pay the rent, bills, textbooks. I picked everything up quickly. The dormitories emptied out once more during winter break, similar to school. When he saw I was still on campus, one of the men from my economics class questioned me why I hadn't left for home. My family lived too far away, I said. With a shrug, he asked me to spend a week with his family. I considered skipping it, but I reasoned that a hot shower and some food couldn't harm. For the first time, I saw what a typical holiday home looked like. There were pictures of his family everywhere, inside jokes, home-cooked meals are served. I was persuaded into a video game contest by his younger sibling. His mom gave me a blanket and instructed me to get goodies from the refrigerator anytime I felt like it. I spent 5 days there. Later that month, just before exams, she texted me to check on me and see if I needed anything. I made the decision to search during that week, not for sentimental reasons. It's more like curiosity. I entered my parents' complete names into a free trial on one of those websites that check up properties. The findings came quickly. 4 years ago, they purchased a new home in a different state. Both of their names were on the home. My mother was mentioned as a volunteer in a school bulletin that I came upon. Next came a blog post from a park event in the area where they were seen with a daughter I had never heard of, and a child who appeared to be around 7 years old. I looked up their names on social media and made a blank account. I located the profiles in a matter of minutes. Pictures of the family, albums of vacations, cakes for birthdays. They were all at a beach resort in one post. Matching attire? Everyone is grinning. Our world, the caption said. I spent 10 minutes looking at that post. I remained silent. Although I didn't message them, I came across the profile of a distant cousin that I dimly recognized from my early years. I only wanted to know why no one had been in touch. A day later, the response was received. It was chilly. Said that I had always been challenging, never thankful. Claimed that I should move on from the past and that my parents had done their best. The last communication I received was that one. The account was banned. I erased it after that and didn't try again. I then immersed myself in my task. I applied for internships and quadrupled my school load, as if my life were on the line. I began working part-time for a local nonprofit after being accepted into a competitive public policy program. There, one of the employees introduced me to journaling. Not a journal, but organized entries that include dates, facts, and private records. I began to write everything down in an attempt to make sense of what had transpired, not to dwell on it. I wrote down everything I could remember, including names, dates, conversations, and locations, because I wanted it to be authentic. I saved the graduation pictures and the returning envelope in a file with my notebook. I had another meeting with the counselor later that spring. We made changes to my emergency contact information. I put the friend's mom on the list. I couldn't think of anyone else who would actually answer the phone, but she was unaware that I'd done that. If I were to suffer something, I kept it a secret from both her and him, but I made a choice after that. I had no intention of writing any more letters. I had no intention of checking their profiles or sending emails. Too many years had already passed as I stood in doorways waiting for someone who would never arrive. From this point on, the narrative was exclusively mine. It took place in the calm week in between midterms. As I typically did before class, I was looking through my university email when I came across a message from a name I hadn't seen in a long time. My father gave it to me. It was a straightforward subject line, "I'm hoping to speak." There were only 4 lines or so in the body. He stated they wanted to get back in touch and asked if I had time for a chat. Before taking any action, I gazed at the screen for a while. The address was accurate. It wasn't a fake or spoof. It complemented the previous one. Although the domain was fresh, I recalled. I didn't respond. I noted the mail for later and sent it to my college advisor. That evening, I texted a snapshot to the buddy whose family had hosted me during winter break. We took a seat and discussed it. I got no responses. They only inquired about my needs and risk tolerance. A week later, I replied, "Just one line. Why now, I asked, why all this time after the prolonged quiet? The following response was swift. According to him, my half-sister, their daughter, had spotted my name in a student spotlight piece. Evidently, the university's website had included my picture and a brief description of a scholarship I had been awarded. The email was triggered by the questions she had asked. They wanted to improve and make apologies, he added. He made no reference to the past in the message. Boarding school was not mentioned. Missed holidays are not mentioned. There was no justification for the lack of attendance at graduation. One sentence about going forward. I responded once more, asking straight out why I had been abandoned at that school for so long. Why hadn't they informed me that they had moved to a different state? Why did no one show up? He disregarded it all in his subsequent statement. He suggested that instead of focusing on the past, we could create something new. No honesty, no details. Just a general discussion on getting back in touch and letting go of grudges. I responded with conditions at that point. I said that any correspondence must be in writing. No unexpected visits, no phone calls, and no communication with other parties. I stated unequivocally that I was financially independent and legally free. I informed him that years prior I had already named my emergency contact, the mother of my buddy, who had arrived when they hadn't. A message appeared from a different number 3 days later. I didn't open it. I instantly banned it after looking up the sender's identity and seeing his initials. On my phone, I have a filter that removes texts from any unauthorized numbers. My mother sent me an email 2 days later. Her voice had changed entirely. She stated she felt helpless at the moment, that she had wanted to reach out, but was scared, and that she blamed him for everything. She said she believed I was content at the academy, and that she had saved some of my school pictures. She expressed her desire that we could speak at some point. I answered once. I refrained from arguing. I made no accusations. I just stated that without them I was secure, healthy, and constructing my life. I informed her that they had made their decisions and that I had made mine, and that I didn't desire a relationship. I wrote one line at the conclusion of the message. Don't get in touch with me again, please. After that, I banned their phone numbers, emails, and any social media accounts that had their names associated with them. I adjusted my privacy settings, deleted any information that was visible to the public, and double-checked every platform I owned. I made a separate online persona for all private correspondence, legal papers, and financial information. I brought the entire printout with me when I saw my therapist that week. We read all of the messages, every answer, every single syllable. I didn't hear from her that I made the correct decision, nor did she tell me I was mistaken. She just gave me insight into the importance of setting and maintaining boundaries. I opened my diary that evening and went back over the notes from my freshman year on the letter that had been returned. The pictures of the family. The employment applications did not include me. I established a new page for the nights I had stayed in the library till it closed. I jotted down every conversation I had solely with them. Just facts, nothing sentimental. What I did, what was said, and how I responded. On my laptop, I then opened a new file. First draft. It wasn't a memoir. Not quite yet. More akin to a collection of personal essays. I didn't begin with the unpleasant recollections. As soon as I graduated, I began working with the train, the vacant seat next me, the quiet. I then wrote about my meals in the flat, the bookshop part-time position. I unfolded it page by page. This was not retaliation. I had no intention of sending it to anybody. It was time to place everything in a permanent location. For me, not for them. Because I had to make sure my tale remained truthful if they were ultimately attempting to change it. I received a letter from the main office that was sent to my university inbox. It included a sealed envelope and the name of a law firm along with the return address. I had to read it twice before I understood it when I first opened it. A minor's emergency guardian had been designated as me, my sister by half. It seems that my parents had plans to escape the country. Based on the paper that is supplied, they had filled out paperwork designating me as the legal backup in the event of an emergency. No warning, no consent. My name appeared as though I had volunteered. I gave the lawyer on the notice a call. They sounded perplexed once they had verified my identification. According to them, they were told that this was a familial arrangement. I clarified that I had not spoken to either parent in years and that I was alienated. There was silence in the queue. They then expressed regret for the error and promised to provide me the required paperwork so I could challenge the file. The next day, I hired a lawyer with the money I had saved from my internship. We included documents proving my legal emancipation and drafted a declaration opposing guardianship. I handed her a packet containing the journal entry confirming the returned letter, my financial assistance papers, and my college enrollment. It would assist in creating a chronology when assembling financial records, she added. She discovered something worse when she searched my credit history. 2 unpaid medical expenses from hospital stays I had as a youngster more than 10 years ago were still on my record. My file was being dragged down by the charges which had been aging in collections. One came from a visit to the urgent care center when I was 11. In the same year, a pediatric hospital stay was the other. When the bills went to a collection agency, the billing system hadn't identified me as a juvenile, and my parents had never taken my name off. My emancipation order and a sworn declaration regarding the family alienation were sent to the hospital once we got in touch with them. In a demand letter, my attorney asked that all of my liabilities be eliminated. After weeks of back and forth, the hospital eventually agreed to expunge the record after confirming that I had never been in charge of payment. I copied all of the emails and put them in a binder. Then things became worse. The financial assistance office at my institution asked for a meeting. According to an anonymous tip they received, I was not eligible for some awards because I had unreported family assistance. I had to represent all of my documents, including bank statements, tax returns, and legal status. My attorney took over and filed official court documents and affidavits attesting to my independence. The assistance office decided in my favor after a thorough assessment, but the timing was too strange to overlook. I requested my attorney to find out where the tip came from. She stated that although we might not receive a name, it might be subpoenaed in subsequent court cases if it originated from a registered user or IP with a pattern. I allowed her to continue if necessary. I refused to allow anyone to undo the progress I had made. I then reviewed all of the university's records and asked for a complete update. I inserted just confirmed chosen contacts, erased their names from the previous forms, and eliminated any lingering family fields. After welcoming me during winter break, the friend's mother consented to sign a notarized letter outlining her history of support and her role as my emergency contact. We also sent that to the school. I was asked to participate in a college panel discussion about overcoming adversity and achieving independence by one of my instructors. Only using my first name, I consented. Students and staff were welcome to attend the panel, and more people than anticipated showed up. I discussed how systems malfunction, who gets lost, and what occurs when no one pays attention. A professor in the writing department then approached me and said, "I had the beginnings of something more. It's a case study on how simple it is for someone to fall through all the cracks if no one asks the necessary questions. Not a narrative to be pitied." I began outlining chapters that evening. The emotional sections weren't where I started. I began by going over the missing medical records, the school records, and the fictitious guardian filing. I was looking for unchangeable facts. In order to prevent my parents from ever utilizing my name in legal documents again, my lawyer finally submitted the necessary paperwork. This implied that I would not be identified in any future filings, guardianship claims, or estate planning without my approval. It would be fraud if they attempted. We also included a declaration in the court file stating that I had no contact with and no responsibilities to any current or potential members of my biological family. The moment was not dramatic. There was no resolution. Final call or email, it was just a quiet night at my apartment with a closed folder and a pile of signed paperwork. Their records no longer contained the version of me they had previously abandoned. Legally speaking, I also didn't exist in theirs. A few months had passed since I formally closed all of the doors that connected me to my parents. I was contacted again this time by Child Protective Services, who wanted to make sure I could take temporary guardianship of my half-sister. Before they revealed that both of my parents had been arrested abroad in relation to financial wrongdoing. I had no idea what had transpired. Authorities had taken their daughter into custody, and she was now part of the system. No one else in the family was coming forward. I informed the agent right away that I was not a good fit and that I had no relationship with her. I said that I had been expressly released from all guardianship responsibilities and had been legally emancipated for years. She acknowledged this and promised to look into other possibilities. The duration of that call was under 10 minutes. The fact that my name had returned to the system was what bothered me. I sought copies of the public records pertaining to my parents' imprisonment by visiting the county court database. Statements in their defense documents that listed me as an adult relative who was distant but reachable were harmful in addition to being untrue. They continued to create the appearance of a working family by utilizing my name. I called my attorney right away. In the court where the charges were pending, we submitted a sworn declaration. Copies of my emancipation documents, my prior guardianship disavowal, and a recent court decision declaring that I had no moral or legal obligations to them were all presented. My attorney warned their legal team in a stop and desist letter that using my identification in the future would be deemed deliberate deception. Through an old academic email that I almost ever checked, I received a message request throughout all of this. It came from a father's side relative whose name I hadn't seen in more than 10 years. It asked if we could speak and was quick and kind. The cousins began by admitting they didn't know much, and I consented to one call, no video, and a monitored app. The family had learned years ago that I had behavioral issues at boarding school, that I had been expelled for disciplinary grounds, and that I had decided to cut everyone off. They claimed that the extended family was told that I had moved on and desired space, which deterred them from contacting me. Then he told me another thing. I didn't care that I had gone away, so my half-sister had grown up believing that I had left. She had never heard anything different from anyone. I didn't want to involve her in this situation. She was a child. She had not produced the falsehoods or made the decisions that put her in the system. Thus, I composed a letter. No resentment, no charges, just the fact that I was sent to boarding school at the age of 9. That on the day of graduation, I hadn't been picked up. That despite my repeated attempts to contact out, I had been ignored. That I stayed with her. It wasn't until I happened upon her name that I was even informed of her existence. I sent it via mail to the foster home that was in charge of her care. No expectation of a response, no return address. I simply did not want her to grow up thinking that everyone had rejected her. A journalist who had been at the college panel I spoke at months earlier sent me another email a few weeks later. She wanted to include my tale in a feature she was creating on institutional alienation. I consented as long as there were no actual names identifying information or pictures. A group that assists foster adolescents and children aging out of state systems picked up the essay and asked me to contribute to a TED-style event they were planning, despite the fact that she appreciated that it was published in a specialized education publication. Resilience was the central subject. I accepted and continued to use the article's pseudonym. The discussion was on structural abandonment, how people cause institutions to fail, and what happens when a kid is repeatedly abandoned. My parents were not mentioned. I mentioned sitting on sidewalks, seeing other children return home for the holidays, and sleeping next to packed bags, but I didn't mention any schools or gift towns. When the event was over, nobody ever showed up. Some audience members waited to shake my hand. No name was given. Simply remain quiet. Regards. After that, I went outside and contacted the friend's mother who had previously offered me a blanket and allowed me to use her refrigerator to get food. I informed her that I had discussed a significant topic. She said that she was already aware that I had for the first time provided her the link in advance. My past was not unique to me. It had become something that when spoken aloud didn't hurt. Not because it vanished, but rather because I could no longer keep it to myself. My lawyer got a message from a new lawyer who was representing my parents a month after the TEDx presentation. There was no legal danger. It was a proposal. They requested that I make a public declaration claiming that I had always communicated with them and that reports of my abandonment had been misconstrued. They were providing a monetary settlement in exchange. The language was purposefully ambiguous. They sought to regain their credibility. They asked me to keep quiet in return for erasing the truth. I didn't answer straight. Within an hour, my lawyer filed a cease and desist letter warning that any more attempts to influence public opinion or compel contact will be met with legal action. With the swap, we also strengthened the protective files we had previously made months earlier in the court file. Through one of the nonprofit organizers who assisted in setting up the TEDx event, it was the last time we heard from them. A literary agent ended up reading my story. She contacted me stating that the combination of the material and personal experience might make a book that focused more on institutional failure than on personal suffering. She requested a sample of my work, and if I was interested, promised to help with the process. The following week, I began writing the chapters. I made no effort to be theatrical. I began by describing the graduation day, the gate being vacant, and the luggage I had packed myself. I concentrated on the shapes and the systems, the records that remained unread and the names that vanished from documents as if they were unimportant were never read. Timelines, notebook pages, and court filings were all included. My writing instructor, who had previously urged me following the college panel, volunteered to assist with editing. She insisted that I write for healing rather than retaliation. At the same time, my lawyer received a different type of message. This one came from one of my half-sister's school counselors, not mine. She wasn't calling me on the parents' behalf. She was upfront about that. The letter I had written months before had reportedly been discovered by the girl. She wanted to respond. Only one. No more communication until I started it. After giving it some thought, I agreed on very precise conditions. Monitored one-time exchange. Filed via the proper legal processes. She typed and carefully folded her letter, which arrived in a simple envelope. It was easy. She claimed to have always been curious about me. She vaguely recalled hearing my name, but she was never able to piece it together. She didn't request justifications, She didn't accuse anyone. Curiosity only. How had I lived my life? Where had I disappeared to? Now, what was I doing? I replied once. I didn't delve deeply. I informed her that I had worked, attended school, and established a life for myself. I didn't leave because I wanted to, I said. I had no choice but to leave. I assured her that she was not at blame for anything that occurred. I wrote a sentence at the conclusion of the letter that I had never used before. Whatever route you choose, I wish you succeed. I left it there after signing my first name. The door was not open, but it was also not locked. For now, it's just closed. I didn't anticipate how much that topic would bring up in therapy. I had never considered what type of brother I may have been, despite having survived years of increasing separation. For a few weeks, that was the main emphasis. When no one ever showed up for you, what it means to show up for someone else. The video went live in the interim. It wasn't promoted by me. At first, I didn't even watch it, but it began to garner some attention. Little shares on kid advocacy sites, trauma circles, and teacher forums. I received several offers to give speeches at juvenile shelters and community colleges. Not much, but sufficient. I began to say yes more frequently. Through my agency, I received a message from a podcast presenter asking whether I would be interested in participating in a series about changing the guardianship and institutional care systems. I consented to a feature about legal negligence and boarding school loopholes under a false identity. I spoke in a calm tone. Just the facts, nothing fancy. As I approached graduation, I made the decision to market for the first time in my life. No ceremony with a hat and gown. Not a word. I just sent out dinner invitations to 5 folks, my writing professor, his mother, 2 coworkers from the organization, and the buddy who transported me home for Christmas break. We got together in a little eatery close to the university. "On your terms" was written on a cake they presented. I gazed at the framed picture of my former boarding school that I had stored in a drawer for years as I made my way home that evening. Just to stop gazing at it, I put it face down in the box I kept with my unread letters and court documents not to discard. I was no longer the abandoned child. I wasn't someone's secret or unfulfilled duty. I was a buddy, a speaker, a writer, and a graduate. And my name was the sole one on my life's documents for the first time. My lawyer phoned me a few weeks after I graduated. My half-sister was the subject of news. Officially, she had been placed in foster care for the time being. On federal financial crime accusations, my parents, who were still in detention abroad, were being considered for extradition to the United States. The legal team discovered an issue when going over the court documents. Once more, their story had included my name. They included a part on family stability in their defense. According to it, I was an active participant in my half-sister's life and a helpful elder sibling. They made allusion to an imaginary connection. Despite the evidence against them, it was an attempt to portray them as responsible parents. Soon later, I received a subpoena to testify. I didn't think twice. I took all of my documents to the deposition, including copies of the letter I had written after graduating, and scanned emails from the school requesting that my parents come get me. The one without a forwarding address was returned. Screenshots of the communications that were banned, as well as testimonies from school employees who had observed year after year as I spent the holidays by myself. I read aloud, supported by documentation, the chronology of all I had gone through. I only mentioned the facts, not my feelings. My lawyer was then informed by the prosecution that the deposition had contributed to the dismantling of the story of a functioning home. The judge presiding over the case acknowledged that my evidence damaged their reputation. Their reputation was no longer going to be safeguarded by my name. A social worker in charge of my half-sister's situation got in touch with me a few days later. She clarified that if no family member stepped in, her interim placement wouldn't continue forever. She would probably be sent to a group home for long-term care. She inquired as to if I could step in and stop her from fully entering the system, however temporarily. I took a while to respond. I took it to therapy instead. I then shared it with the few individuals I trusted, including my writing professor, my counselor, and my friend's mother. I asked them to share any observations they made that they thought I could be missing. Everyone used various terms to say the same thing. Don't let your guilt make you become someone you were never permitted to be. After considering that for a few days, I responded. I was unprepared to care for a teenager. I had recently received my degree. I was working contract hours beginning from scratch and developing a writing portfolio. To soothe someone else's conscience, I didn't want to assume a position that I hadn't earned. After I politely and plainly informed the social worker the facts, she praised me for being honest and stated that they would look into alternative possibilities. In the meanwhile, my agency requested that the work be revised. She noted that while the novel had a good framework, it required more plot, less legal paperwork, and more human turning moments. I revisited the early chapters I wrote about the closed mail cubbies the first time I learned no one was coming for me over winter break, and the day a dorm supervisor allowed me to sleep in the staff lounge because I didn't want to be alone myself in my room during that time. I received an offer to participate on a popular podcast about trauma-informed schooling. I consented to use my true name this time. The host was competent. The discussion remained on course. We discussed policies, record-keeping, and how some children may only ever know a steady environment at school. Exposure didn't feel like it. It seemed like a contribution. I was soon asked to speak at a nonprofit's annual gala. They specialized in working with young people who were leaving residential programs. I contemplated declining it. I didn't want to give public speeches, but I had a feeling this one was different. Yes, I replied. There were many others who understood despite the tiny size of the gathering. I discussed documentation and how each lost record is a tale that vanishes after the discussion. A calm older woman came up to me. She identified herself as a former instructor at my boarding school. When the event was announced, she knew my name. She informed me that scanned copies of the letters she attempted to deliver to my parents were among the data she still retained. The recipient's address was not discovered on all returning envelopes. Faculty meetings with unidentified notes about my being put behind year after year. She offered to send them to me by email. I spent a lot of time sitting with the files once they arrived. They were only pages and pictures. However, each of them filled a void that I had endured for years. Not feeling, but evidence. Evidence that it wasn't my imagination. That it wasn't just a loud silence. It had been captured on tape. They were included in the manuscript by myself, to ensure that the next child whose tale like mine won't be told not to level accusations or add drama. They didn't recall. A few of us managed to avoid falling between the gaps we were shoved. I have the documents to back it up now. One morning, a communication from a certified legal guardian was delivered to me by my publisher. Neither my parents nor their attorneys sent it. It began with the caseworker assigned to oversee my half-sister's foster placement. It was a straightforward message. She only wanted to see me once. Only if I consented would it be overseen and planned in a neutral site. My lawyer and the caseworker made sure she was of legal age and had completed a full cycle of therapy to get ready before I said yes. There was no pressure, no ulterior objectives. She had complete control of it. I consented on very specific conditions with no emotional expectations placed on either party and no supervision of any subsequent personal contact unless I so desired. A youth advocacy center next to the local courtroom served as the venue for the gathering. We merely watched from a room with a counselor close by. With a notepad in hand, she entered in silence. She probed thoughtfully and clearly about education. My post-boarding existence, the pictures of me in the charity newsletter that she had seen, I gave an honest response without going into too much detail. I stuck to the facts. I described the years that passed between my departure and my discovery of her existence. She didn't weep, but she did nod a lot. She acknowledged in the end that she had always sensed something was wrong, particularly when my name started to show up in public places. First through the TED Talk and then through the book's initial references. We didn't give each other hugs. We made no commitments. For a while, we decided to write just letters on occasion. I advised her to concentrate on finishing her programs and graduating from school and not to feel pressured to continue contacting others unless it seemed right. That was the agreement. Weightless, courteous, and unambiguous. Neither of us was capable of carrying. The publishing business officially accepted my manuscript as a non-fiction imprint that same week. The book would be marketed as a narrative about regaining identity and overcoming institutional failure rather than merely abandonment. After a branding session with their marketing team, there was a picture shoot. They had a lighting team, a stylist, and even a person who set up objects to symbolize important plot points. A folded boarding school jacket was draped over a chair as I stood in front of a background. It seemed unreal. They inquired as to whether I participate in panels, interviews, media appearances, and maybe television segments. To most of them, I answered no. My goal was to avoid becoming a spectacle. Emphasizing the systems rather than the survivor was the main goal of the memoir. I requested that they steer their marketing away from viral clickbait and daytime drama shows and towards school administrators and youth initiatives. My former boarding school contacted me at that time. I was invited to be included in their alumni newsletter by someone from their administration. They presented it as a motivational triumph. I rejected in a straight letter. They had let the peace around me remain too quiet for too long, I informed them plainly. But now that my name had public significance, I wouldn't be just another feather in their crown. I received a letter with no return address a few days later. There was also no name inside. However, the penmanship was recognizable. Long pages of emotive reasoning evasion and a few apologies, interspersed with phrases blaming the past, made up the letter. It just expressed remorse without taking responsibility nor acknowledging the facts. I didn't respond. My lawyer took it from me and included it in the contact history. It would be sealed, kept in storage, and consulted only when required. Nothing else could be said. I then searched through all of my digital accounts, including public websites, professional platforms, and social media. I deleted old university images, restricted tagging, closed down all secondary contact possibilities, and changed my privacy settings. I cleaned out any metadata that would reveal where I was. I made an anonymous donation to a foundation that supports students in long-term foster care with the next speaking fee I got. I just sent the money, wrote a quick note to the director, and requested that it be used for transitory housing stipends without posting about it. After that, I started providing free weekend writing classes to teenagers who had aged out of residential programs at a nearby library. No group meetings or therapy talks, simply a certain period of time during which they may write about anything. Fiction, poems, music, journals. The sole restriction was that it could not be read aloud. They returned each week, but the majority didn't. I completed preparations for the pre-launch tour, which is not a media circus as the memoir's release date drew near. Just a few gatherings at conferences, juvenile shelters, and schools where the focus was on rebuilding rather than recounting. In collaboration with the publisher, I ensured that each stop had resource tables in addition to book stands. A mental health professional was in each condo, and each stage was shared with another person engaged in meaningful work. I wasn't asking anyone to come to my aid this time. I was also turning up for those who were never picked up. Early in the spring, the memoir was published. Early evaluations started to come in quietly but steadily within a few days. The majority of them gave it high marks for handling desertion without making it a show. Some claimed it was grounded, clear-eyed, and more powerful for its silence. After reading them once and discussing my remarks with my publisher, I resumed my work on the next event. In the second week, the national radio interview took place. The topic about resilience in children was live. The presenter inquired about youth shelters' gaps in education and documents. She then stopped and inquired as to whether your parents were around at the moment. Would you like them to hear anything? I didn't hesitate. I just stated that there was nothing more to say. We went on. Subsequently, the publisher invited me to participate in a 5-city limited edition tour that highlighted systemic gaps in guardianship and failures as well as survival tales. I was placed among other authors who had rebuilt something after surviving damaged systems. Following the reading, people lingered at each event. There were those who waited silently. Some of them broke down in tears. They only mentioned that they believed they were alone up to this point. A woman in Philadelphia placed a folded letter in my palm at a little library. The penmanship was precise and kind. No signature, no return information, just a little note. Asterisk. While in foster care, I read your book. If I was invisible, I constantly wondered. I realize now that I wasn't. Thank you. My half-sister gave it to me. I didn't say aloud about it. I entered it next to the previous student ID in my wallet. Not foreclosure, but I used to carry when I initially moved into the flat after graduating. As evidence that truth endures even in the face of familial failure. I entered a surprise book party a week later. My best friends and their mother, who first allowed me to reside at her house when I was a college student, had planned everything. Every door was left open, but there was a cake shaped like a boarding school. After forcing me to read aloud from a page of the book, they gave me a little framed award that stated, "You showed up." That's sufficient. I held on to it. A documentary filmmaker who had seen a review in an educational publication emailed me after the trip was over. He asked whether I would be interested in turning the novel into a television show. I informed him that I would only think about it if I had complete creative control and ultimate say over every script. The proposal is now in the early stages of discussion, after he consented to a development meeting. I began dating someone at about the same time. It moved slowly, no big discussion in the beginning. No complete disclosures regarding schools or courtrooms. We watched documentaries, ate together, and took walks. Instead than discussing past breakdowns, we discussed literature and aspirations for the future. I didn't feel like I needed to explain everything in order to be understood for the first time. Breathing was possible. A legislative reform organization focusing on guardianship legislation and school reporting requirements reached out to me a few weeks later. They sought someone with first-hand knowledge to address the Education Committee as they prepared to introduce a measure that would increase openness and custodial files. I spent 2 days writing my statement. I didn't share any stories. I cited examples of timeframes, gaps, and oversights from court documents that had been censored. I said that children shouldn't vanish between forms as I concluded my speech. If we don't lose them early, we won't have to look for them later. When I ended that summer, a box arrived with no note, just a picture of my half-sister clutching a diploma on a school wall. No return address, no words, just her grinning. I positioned it next to mine, one atop the other. Nothing spectacular, simply evidence that two individuals who were never meant to cross paths had managed to do so. In order to permanently remove my parents from all emergency contact lists, inheritance filings, and next of kin status, I completed the last set of paperwork with my lawyer a few weeks later. The modifications were approved by the court, and that was that. I could never be listed again. No signatures, no paperwork, no presumptions. I traveled abroad on my own for the first time this fall. I strolled into a sleepy hamlet that was home to one of Europe's oldest boarding schools. The visit was not planned by me, it was simply in the area. I passed the gate and stopped for a second. Children were giggling and carrying bags as they ran through the yard. For about a minute I stood. Then for the first time in my life I gave a single nod, turned around and continued to walk. I did not feel like the abandoned youngster. Story 2. I'm a 29-year-old man who works as a software developer in Denver. To be honest, I felt alone for a long time until I was 19. But I have been out on my own since then. My parents weren't the worst people in the world when I was growing up. They stored food in the refrigerator. Although they occasionally attended school functions, warmth was never a part of the experience. If I received an A, they simply nodded. But if I received a B+, they wanted to know why it wasn't an A. I rapidly discovered that approval was something you had to earn, rather than something you were given simply for being alive. My sister is older than me. In their perspective, she has always been the simpler one, more conventional and amiable. More of everything they believed a decent child ought to be. She kept in touch and called frequently. Went into a profession that never caused them to doubt their parenting, and that made sense to them. I wasn't disobedient. I simply didn't fit their intended blueprint. The things I wanted were different. I had opinions. I moved out on my 19th birthday and used student loans and part-time work to pay for education. No assistance, no handouts, and most definitely no satisfaction in my accomplishment. Nevertheless, I hoped that they might change their ways eventually. I continued to text them about accomplishments, job advancements, moving into my own place, and at best finishing a large project. At worst, I would receive a short, pleasant, or a thumbs up emoji, nothing at all. If I didn't match their definition of success, or at least didn't do it in a way that they could claim credit for, it became a pattern. That was not relevant. When I met Caroline, that changed. She is a 28-year-old first-grade teacher who exudes a sense of visibility. She had a deeper understanding of people than I did when we first met 2 years ago. She was kind, witty, and patient without trying. And the very first person I felt comfortable taking home. With previous boyfriends, I had never presented anyone to my parents. I never even considered the possibility. It never seemed worthwhile, but perhaps I thought with her, this might be a pivotal moment. Perhaps they would at last recognize the life I had created. They fell in love with her right away. They clicked with her so instantly that it was almost unnerving. At dinners, my dad began to chat more. My mom started preparing our favorite meals once more. They questioned her. They chuckled more. My dad even started contacting me to see if Caroline had informed me about something amusing that had occurred at school, rather than to see how I was doing. As though he had known her for years, he began to tell anecdotes about her. Even if we had nothing scheduled, that they would still ask us over. It felt good at first, as if they were evolving. Perhaps they were becoming softer with age. Little things, however, began to seem strange. During a supper one evening, my mother chuckled and remarked that Caroline was smoothing out my rough spots. It seemed like a strange way to compliment her, so I dismissed it at the moment. However, it continued to occur. My dad would smile and remark, "She's really shaping you into something impressive," whenever Caroline mentioned that I had picked up a new pastime. As we sat down to eat, they would inquire about her plans, her pupils, and her classroom. They would simply nod before going back to her when I brought up anything from work, like getting a promotion I had been aiming for months. We attended a family cookout one afternoon. My extended family consisted of their aunts, cousins, and other relatives. I overheard my folks gushing about how Caroline had improved me as a man. They didn't truly mean it when they stated it as a joke. It continued by talking about how she made me feel my best self and how I at last appeared stable. How she was the reason for everything. I recall feeling like a shadow in my own story as I stood there smiling pleasantly and trying not to show it. However, I do remember looking at the grass for a while. Once while I was in the kitchen by myself with my mother, I made a casual attempt to bring it up. They never really gave me credit for anything unless it involved Caroline, which I told her kind of stung. "But she's been such a good influence on you," she replied, blinking. "Isn't that important?" That was her response, not denying, just a referral, no apologies. The true victor was Caroline. She only made me a better project. I held off on telling Caroline everything. She believed that my family's situation was finally improving. She believed it was therapeutic when she saw them grinning and extending an invitation to visit. And I understand. I hadn't shared with her the years of being ignored, the incessant comparisons to my sister, and how I'd come to value myself based on my ability to demonstrate that I didn't want to destroy what she saw to be a positive thing. However, I also began keeping a journal. I wasn't sure if I was seeing it clearly for the first time or whether I was just overanalyzing it. The transition began at that point. I came to the realization that Caroline had not increased my parents' love for me. They really adored the image of me she conjured up in their minds. And after that cookout, I doubt they would see much value in remaining for a few weeks if she ever departed. I was talking to my mother on the phone about our plans for the weekend. Nothing significant. She said something that struck me like a smack out of the blue. Caroline, she claimed, was everything they had dreamed I would become. She said it without biting, as if she were discussing the weather in a casual manner. I didn't answer at all. Until the call ended, I simply gazed at the floor and let her continue talking. My sister came over later that week. Although we are not very close, we have always maintained a kind of covert partnership. The way our parents lighted up around Caroline and hardly saw anyone else in the room when she was present was something she had also noticed. "It wasn't just me," she said. She attempted to tell our mother about a new project she was working on during a dinner a few weeks prior. But my mother interrupted her to inquire if Caroline had seen a specific documentary. It reminded me of this earlier in the month. My dad had offered to come fix the kitchen ceiling that was leaking. Caroline prepared lunch since she didn't have to work that day. I hoped it would be a nice chance to bond. My dad arrived with a toolbox, put it down, and then sat on a bar stool for the next 3 hours discussing everything from meal preparation to school rules with Caroline. When I asked him whether he needed a stepladder, he didn't even glance toward the ceiling. He promised to return at a later date. He didn't. It was a sign of development, Caroline thought. She poured tea, listened to his stories, and later confided in me that she believed my dad only needed a little time to be loved. She hadn't heard the complete backstory from me. I was always a footnote throughout those years of disinterest, unless the praise was being given to someone else. This struck her as something fresh and lovely. For a moment I wanted to believe it too, so I let her think that. We all sat beneath the old maple tree in the backyard the next time we came for lunch. My mother asked Caroline whether she had considered wedding destinations as soon as she brought out sandwiches and lemonade. I hadn't yet made a proposal. They were completely off topic, and I hadn't even alluded to it. Guest lists, fashion trends, and even the kinds of flowers Caroline preferred. I smiled as I sat there and announced that I had recently received a promotion at work. "That's excellent," remarked my dad with a single nod, then went back to questioning Caroline about the garden program at her school. I stayed with my mom after everyone else had gone inside. I told her that in my own relationship I felt like I was being marginalized, because Caroline seemed to be the object of their interest rather than me. She didn't stop. She didn't dispute it. She advised me not to destroy this and stated Caroline was a positive influence. There was no return for me. I simply stepped inside to assist with cleanup. Around that time, I began to feel like I was only a supporting character in my own life. It felt like I was following Caroline to my family's house each time we went there. Her thoughts on kitchen appliance investments were solicited by my parents, regarding whether she believed I was getting enough greens in my diet. As if she were the head of the household, my dad once called her aside and gave her advice on financial planning. Because she is who she is, she listened and smiled. However, even she was somewhat perplexed afterwards. Chris, one of my closest friends, first met my parents when he came over for supper. He stated on the way home, he couldn't tell whether they liked me or just the person next to me. "I felt like a +1 to my own life tale," he remarked. Although it was a joke, it came a bit too close. I took some time that week to write a letter. I didn't want to get into a confrontation or blow up at anyone. I simply wanted to make things plain. I explained to them how their actions made me feel how marginalized I felt, and how it appeared that they only valued me when it came to someone else. I informed them that I desired a genuine relationship rather than one in which I had to be someone else's reflection in order to be accepted. I didn't think they would alter. I most certainly didn't anticipate an apology. However, what followed was something I truly didn't anticipate. One afternoon, Caroline asked me if I had intended to show her the letter when she got home. At first, I didn't get it. She showed me the email that my mother had forwarded after opening her phone. Word for word, I copied and pasted my letter. Not a warning. No warning. Sent to her with no remarks at all. She was unaware of its depth. She was unaware of how long this had been going on or how hard I'd been trying to hide my discomfort. She said that the fact that my parents had acted in such a way behind my back caught her off guard, not me. However, they felt at ease enough with her to tell me something about me without my consent. Everything changed in that instant, not only between Caroline and me, but also between my parents and me. She saw the full picture for the first time, and I realized that things would not return to their previous state. Caroline read the letter my mother forwarded the following evening. We reviewed everything while seated in the living room. Not only the letter, but also its background. Birthdays have been commemorated in old texts, as have the occasions when I broke good news and received no response. Everything. I retrieved previous mails in which I informed them of milestones that were overlooked. Screenshots of conversations showed that our parents had called to discuss Caroline's Instagram post, but they hadn't inquired about my well-being, according to my sister. I didn't keep anything to myself. Caroline didn't try to make it seem nice. She acknowledged that she had thought their affection was sincere, but it was now clear how much of it was focused on her alone. Her presence filtered every time they smiled or shown pride. They returned to being aloof and preoccupied without her present. She told me that she believed she was contributing to the construction of a bridge. She was unaware that she was now the only reason they cared to come. That evening, we decided. Once again, we would attend a family meal, with the whole truth on the table this time. Caroline was determined to see it for herself. She claimed that she had been viewing them with optimism and that had to stop. We arrived on a Saturday night with a bottle of wine and no preconceived notions. Once more, dinner was served in the backyard. Candles were lit on the table and a jazz playlist was playing on my dad's old Bluetooth speaker. Everything appeared well polished, as if they were putting on a show. At first, the chat was informal and focused on work. A cousin of mine is getting engaged. My dad then got up to salute the group. Caroline has brought light into our lives and we both seem to be building something strong together, he added, lifting his glass. Everyone gave a clap. I went into the kitchen with my mom to assist with the dishes after supper. I questioned why I wasn't even named in the toast. She didn't even pause. They were just being honest, she claimed. At home, Caroline was in the bathroom taking off her earrings while I perched on the side of the bed. Without saying anything, she left and sat down beside me. I informed her that despite my best efforts throughout my life, I had never been able to make her proud unless I was accompanied by someone they liked more. There was silence in the room for a few seconds. She took the initiative after that. Unless there was genuine respect, she added, there would be no more dinners or visits. No more grinning in the face of circumstances that left us exhausted afterwards. Caroline responded independently the following time my mom sent out a happy group message inviting us to brunch. She graciously declined, thanked her, and stated that we needed some room. She received a message a few hours later that was anything but courteous. It was lengthy, lined with phrases about how terrible it was to see her change, and it was laced with gold. Caroline used to be warm and open, and it seemed like bitterness had taken root, my mother wrote. She even inquired as to whether Caroline actually knew who she intended to wed, or if I had been concealing my true identity the entire time. I responded in writing. I didn't yell or make any accusations, I simply outlined it. I assured her that we needed emotional security in our life, and that while we wouldn't be leaving anyone behind, we wouldn't continue to act as like nothing was wrong. I told them this wasn't about influence and stood up for Caroline. Dignity was at issue here. One sentence was my mother's response. She is the one you are choosing over your family. No, I'm finally choosing myself, I replied. I never sent them another message after that. That evening, I deleted their old texts and blocked both of their numbers. However, in the weeks that followed, they started attempting to contact us through new accounts and outside contacts. I kept it a secret. I didn't request authorization. I just completed it. Caroline followed suit. She went to her social media accounts, deleted both of them, and blocked their email addresses with filters. It wasn't furious or dramatic. It was simply required. She was going to stop putting up with their remarks. We purchased a tiny lockbox that weekend, printed up some important letters and screenshots, and stored everything away in case something happened. As a line in the sand, not as proof. No more defense, no more explanation. We were now creating a life with individuals who saw us not just the aspects of us that gave them self-confidence. For the first time in my life, I felt as though I was the one telling the story, not for or about me. My sister called about a week after we stopped communicating. She wasn't calling to talk things out or make amends. She merely wanted to inform me that Caroline was now frequently invited to family gatherings by our parents without my presence. She claimed that they were continued conversing as if nothing had occurred. They weren't upset. I was simply being edited out. Caroline discovered a formal envelope addressed just to her when she opened our mailbox 2 days later. An invitation to lunch at a nearby country club was enclosed. I'm not mentioned anywhere. My mother's handwriting was all over the card, but the return address was blank. Like a wedding invitation, it was signed and dated, including information about the dress code, and included a statement expressing how much they were excited to meet her. Without saying a word, Caroline handed it to me. After that, she went to the kitchen and disposed of it in the garbage. When she checked her email that evening, she saw 2 fresh messages. My father gave me one, and my mother gave me another. They were both courteous, but cunning. For example, "Just come this once," they said. "We don't want to lose you either, therefore we won't discuss him." She wasn't being asked to act as a mediator. They were acting as though I didn't exist in order to maintain their relationship with her. She didn't respond. She installed filters and blacklisted both email addresses. However, before we changed our filters once more, they began contacting us from different emails and unidentified domains. When I was being forced out of my own life, she assured me that she would not be used as a bridge. Loyalty like that doesn't require discussion. I scheduled a therapy session over the phone the next morning. I believed I had gained enough distance, so I had stopped running a while ago, but suddenly it felt like the walls were closing in once again. The majority of the session was devoted to discussing identity and the consequences of growing up with the belief that one is unworthy until someone else corrects them. For the first time, I was able to see it clearly thanks to my therapist. I was never appreciated by my parents for who I was. The only persons they valued were those who improved my image in their eyes. Caroline's parents became aware of a problem. One day, they arrived with takeaway and stayed to assist us in coming up with wedding-related ideas. Caroline's mother talked about relieving some of our planning burden. If we needed someone to manage logistics, her dad offered to speak with vendors. They refrained from prying. They simply arrived and demonstrated their support for us. That Friday, the peace didn't last long. I was called into a meeting room at work by my manager. She reported that a man posing as my father had attempted to leave a parcel at the front desk. There was a framed picture in the box. My mother and Caroline stood together at a family cookout months ago. The rear of the frame has a letter glued to it. The family security log is still something we believe in. The event. My business updated their visitor list and submitted a proper report. I informed them that no member of my family should ever be accepted again, and I provided them the entire names of my parents. I also posted a red flag for possible harassment to my HR file and updated my emergency contacts. I composed a little farewell note when I came home. It was straightforward, not furious. This was no longer a difference of opinion, I informed them. The line was obvious. I said that we were done dating and that any more communication would be viewed as harassment. Then, using a third-party application to filter and reroute anything that might get through, I permanently blacklisted their email addresses. Caroline became jittery whenever her phone buzzed. They seemed to be coming up with fresh strategies to avoid us. She received an unexpected message from a cousin inquiring how she was doing, but she made no mention of me. She was tagged on social media by someone else in an old family photo. None of it got a response from her. She changed her privacy settings, removed herself from the group pages, and erased the posts. She even deleted her public images and altered her profile name to something neutral. We received a card in the mail a few days later. My parents didn't give it to me personally. After we moved apartments, it was redirected via a forwarding service. The return address came from a PO, and the handwriting was clearly legible. Box in a different state. It was a brief message. Caroline is worthy of better. The final straw was that, after scanning the card, we gave it to our attorney. Adding it to our paperwork, he opened a new folder and instructed us to record everything going forward. There will be no more conversations or grace periods. Crossing the next line would immediately enter lawful area. That weekend, we didn't travel anywhere. We remained inside, added 2 extra locks to the front door, and changed our passwords. Family was no longer the focus of this. Control and preventing them from gaining any more ground were the main concerns. To take a breather, we scheduled a weekend getaway. Nothing special, just a cottage with a lake view 2 hours away and no phone service for the most of the travel. A pile of books was brought by Caroline. I assembled the most basic meals I could fit in a cooler. The first day, we didn't discuss anything serious. Simply played card games and barbecued hamburgers while sitting outside. Caroline's phone service returned the following morning when we drove into town to get coffee. A friend request from someone I hadn't spoken to in more than 10 years was directly at the top of her notifications. I knew this man from middle school. I hadn't spoken to him since I graduated from high school, and we were never close. His profile appeared typical with generic posts and family images, but the timing seemed strange. She agreed to the request 10 minutes later. There was a message. It was friendly at first, then changed. He said he had heard there was conflict in the family, and he hoped Caroline wouldn't allow resentment to get in the way of her future with us. He concluded by saying that years of connection shouldn't be ruined by one person's resentment. Without a word, she showed me the message. I sent him a direct message to find out how he had learned about our predicament. He acknowledged that my parents had been in touch. They apparently started calling folks I used to know, people who no longer really played a role in my life, after looking through old yearbooks. They were sharing stories about how Caroline had grown aloof, how I had changed, and how the harm being done devastated them. I recognized then that getting back in wasn't the only goal. The goal was to control the narrative. I called a few people I trusted as soon as we returned home, including my sister, 2 college acquaintances, and a few relatives I had remained in touch with. I told them everything. I requested that anyone who contacted me on behalf of my parents do so without replying, without defending me, and without serving as a mediator. Then I urged them to move on. They all concurred. During that call, my sister stated something that stayed. Our mother has been working on a new family scrapbook, she informed me. The draft was visible to her. Caroline filled pages and pages of it. Photos from holidays and dinners, images from Caroline's blog at the public school. Almost none of me, though. One picture of us together, perhaps. The remainder seemed to be a list of their ideal daughter-in-law. As I conveyed that section, Caroline sat across from me. As she cleared out her inbox that evening, her smile quickly vanished. Another chain was provided to her by a distant relative who shared vacation photos, along with a statement stating that the family simply isn't the same without Caroline. No mention of me again. During all of this, she questioned me if we were making a mistake by organizing a wedding. It's about the event, not about us. Whether we were working so hard to create something happy while people continued to gnaw away at it from underneath, or whether it had turned into more of a defense than a celebration. This has nothing to do with the wedding, I informed her. We were the focus, that those who were attempting to distort it had no place in our future. We took a seat on the couch and went over the guest list once more, noting the names of those we trusted. The ones about which we had doubts, I maintained a digital folder. Copies of invitations, screenshots of messages, or any correspondence that seemed even remotely targeted. In the event that legal action was ever required, my therapist advised keeping everything in chronological order. Caroline also contributed. Even a spreadsheet was made by her. A few days later, her father stopped by to bring dessert and to see how we were doing while we were eating. He suggested that they elope. There is no pressure, just something to think about. Something modest, somewhere peaceful. No sounds from outside. Caroline didn't immediately respond, but she also didn't ignore it. There was nothing retreating about the suggestion. It had the feel of defense. My sister sent me a screenshot of a family group conversation the following day that I hadn't seen since I left. My mom was telling everyone that I had turned Caroline against them, and that she missed the Caroline who gave them cookies and smiled when they told their stories. My sister immediately left the conversation after telling them she was done playing along. A fresh card showed up in our mailbox later that week. It wasn't written by hand. It seems to have been printed by a generic company. "You can do better," it remarked, referring to one of those pre-made message sites. "Consider your future offspring. No return address, no name." That afternoon, we went to the police, filed a non-emergency report, and turned in a copy of the card and the list of the visits and messages we had recorded. After paying close attention, the officer stated that our early preparation that evening was the proper thing to do. Around the house, the front door, the back fence, and the driveway, we put in outside security cameras. We established new app locks and modified our Wi-Fi password. While we were setting everything up, we didn't say much. The more we attempted to proceed, the more evident it became that this would not end on its own. I also began researching the operation of restraining orders for the first time. I took charge before things went too far, not because I sought retribution, but because I finally realized what it meant to do so. The next weekend, we completed the installation of the remaining security system. By the rear gate, a second video doorbell was installed. We enrolled with the neighborhood alert program, which alerts us if something strange is reported close, and motion-activated cameras were installed along the side alley. We kept track of anything out of the ordinary in a new shared calendar that Caroline made call dogs. Each and every card block number and social media effort was recorded in that file. The next issue was the mailbox. We updated it for all official banks and bills and moved to a box across town. Invites. Anything that was important. Caroline erased our home address from all of the records by calling the front desk of her school. We instructed our closest friends not to send anything private to the house, since it would block the sole way for them to get in touch. Caroline went further than that. She generated a list of names, blocked terms, and known associates connected to my parents by using extensive filters on her email account. Anything that even vaguely resembled her would be sent to a quarantine bin and never returned to her inbox. The wedding was moved. It seemed exposed now when the earlier location had been something semi-public and attractive. We put the venue name on a need-to-know list and moved to a tiny lakeside location without an internet presence. 22 people were left on the guest list. Maybe don't list any +1s unless we've already met them. In the middle of the week, anyone who even remotely breached our borders was immediately crossed off. An old college mentor sent me a message. I had respected him as my academic counselor. He said my parents had gotten in touch with him. They say they were merely checking in on Caroline and figuring out how they could rebuild the bridge, he said. Although he withheld specifics, the message was obvious. They continued to work in the background. That afternoon, I made contact with the Human Resources Department at my place of employment. I told them everything. Previous trips, the incident with the framed photo, the card, and the untrue stories. I asked to be informed if my parents called, emailed, or showed up, updated my emergency contacts, and marked their names as no contact. HR confirmed that the security team will be informed moving forward and filed a report. Caroline and I took a seat that night and composed a letter to relatives. There was no drama. We simply mentioned that we were going low contact for our own safety and mental well-being because of persistent boundary infractions. We requested to avoid interfering in family conversations and to exclude from future events anyone who was unable to respect our choice. The majority of folks never responded. Some of them left subdued messages of encouragement. I received texts from 2 cousins who said they believed I was overreacting and severing ties with family out of pride. I didn't answer. The following week, Caroline began her treatment. The focus has changed from perplexing to oppressive. She let her therapist in on all the things that had been said to her, sent to her, and how it felt to be treated more like a conduit than a human being. Her therapist recommended creating a shared record that would include dates, names, and supporting documentation akin to an incident chronology. There was no panic. The purpose was to become ready. Caroline was stopped by a woman near the produce department of the supermarket store 2 days later. "It must be nice to clean up someone's life like that," she replied with a smile. She made no introduction. She gave no explanation. She simply left with a smug expression. We had never seen her before, either of us. However, that sentence was a clear reiteration of a dinner table statement made by my mother. We logged it as soon as we got home. We recognized then that the story was no longer limited to the family. Everywhere they could, that they were distributing it. Through strangers we never ever met. Such a story in which Caroline was the one who saved the troubled kid, the one who fixed him, had evolved from a little slight into a full-fledged campaign. We got in touch with the attorney we had been corresponding with since the initial card. He guided us through alternatives for stop and desist, what constituted harassment, and how to clearly document everything for legal purposes. We were assembling all the components, but we weren't filing anything just yet. Caroline received a message on LinkedIn a few days later. It was brief and only contained general greetings from my father. Don't apologize, no invitation to speak. Just enough to show up in her alerts without setting off sensors. She reported the message as harassment blocked him right away and took a screenshot. After noticing it, LinkedIn emailed a confirmation. We placed an order for takeaway that evening and sat quietly for a time. Caroline was looking over the guest list once more on her open laptop. I was looking at the shared folder that contained all of the contacts, letters, screenshots, and messages from random people. I then uttered it aloud, simply naming the fact that had been present in the room the entire time without asking a question or seeking solace. Their affection was never truly for me if it was only ever about who I was with at the time. The wedding was moved out of state. The new destination was a tiny winery nestled into a hillside 3 hours away. It was far enough to allow us some breathing room and private enough that a casual search would not turn up the address. The vineyard was ideal because it handled reservations discreetly and didn't publicly promote events. We limited the number of guests to 20. Everyone who was invited had either supported us during the previous few months or had avoided the turmoil altogether. Those who attempted to play both sides were not selected. We only told our planner and ourselves about the location. My sister volunteered to help with the planning. She promised us that she would personally handle all of the calls, deliveries, and vendor instructions after clearing her schedule. In case someone attempted to track it down, she secured every detail, including removing her name from all internet forums. We told her not to make mistakes or be surprised if there was any indication of a leak at all. We would make all the changes again. Caroline got a parcel at her school the same week we finalized the guest list. Since no sender was identified and no one could verify who it was from the front desk staff summoned her in, there was a picture frame made of white wood with silver letters carved on it. The best choice he ever made was to have her without a card or signature, but with a font and design that matched a Christmas present my mother had once given us. It was not taken home by Caroline. The same afternoon, she handed it straight to our lawyer. Using the product code, the lawyer contacted the vendor. They verified that it was purchased from an account that belonged to my mother. 2 days after we switched the location, it had been processed. That was sufficient evidence for us. We asked the vendor to stop delivering to our address the address of the school, my place of employment, and the PO in the future. Boss Caroline's father needed to get in touch with a family harassment lawyer who dealt with situations involving high conflict boundaries. After putting us in contact, he helped us create a legal timeline, established a new case file, and set up a consultation with that lawyer. All of the cards, messages, and indirect contacts were presented in chronological order. During a therapy session, we gathered printouts, security video, and receipts from the shared log we had been creating for months. What had been in my chest since the beginning was finally expressed. For the majority of my life, I had shaped myself into the ideal version of myself that my parents desired. I persisted in believing that they would eventually recognize my worth if I put in enough effort and kept quiet enough. They only ever showed pride when Caroline, another person, made me appear to be the kind of man they had always hoped I would be. One decision was made at the end of that session. Low contact was not what I wanted. I desired complete and irreversible separation. Caroline didn't hesitate when I informed her later. She claimed to have spent weeks there already. Caroline's school reported an email from an unknown address 3 days later. It included a receipt for a gift made in Caroline's name to a nonprofit organization that promotes children's literacy. The donation was made in honor of a woman who transformed a lost man into something better, according to the note. There were no names, but the tone was obvious. Although the invoice information contained our previous zip code, the IT office at her school was able to identify the sender as a masked account connected to a known spam domain. After adding it to the file and getting in touch with the nonprofit, our lawyer got them to agree to stop any more attempts using that donor ID. I received a voicemail later that week from my workplace's receptionist. The person who left it was anonymous. The message stated that I was mentally unstable and should be checked out before something happens, but the voice was unfamiliar. My manager reported it right away. I saved the communication and attached it to my HR file. We asked for transcripts and had them added to our court filings. Our lawyer informed us that we had more than enough to move on at this time. He started drafting official restraining order documents based on unwanted targeting, digital interaction, and third-party harassment. We didn't have to wait for things to worsen, he remarked. We concurred. Any more communication, any involvement, no matter how subtle, anonymous, or indirect, would be seen as illegal. That evening, we got together and revised the wedding's last plans. We switched the RSVP process to a website that requires a password. If necessary, we had a contingency plan to move within 24 hours. In the event that something was intercepted, we purchased decoy centerpieces. We have contingency plans for visitor transportation. In the event of an emergency, my sister kept a backup phone number on hand. Drama was no longer what we were preparing for. For peace, we were getting ready. Not an apology, not a performance, just a place where the only individuals there were those who truly knew who we were. Making someone proud was not going to be the goal of the wedding. It would be about defending the life we were jointly choosing. In the closing moments leading up to the wedding, every last element was secured. The guest list for the venue, timetable, transportation. Only those who absolutely needed to know were informed. They even sent out staggered texts with the arrival times. Our planner only utilized secure paper invitations with a private RSVP link that expired after one use, and she only used coded names in her paperwork. It has nothing to do with being dramatic. There was no other way to maintain cleanliness. I received a screenshot from my sister, who has been assisting with the arrangements since the location shift. It was a message from our parents one evening. They didn't request an invitation. They made no attempt to apologize. They simply requested that she covertly capture pictures throughout the ceremony and forward them to them afterwards. They even provided guidance on maintaining discretion. There was no answer from my sister. That evening, she texted me to let me know she was totally out and blocked both of them. There will be no more updates, no more serving as a contact point. She declared that she had no interest in acting as though everything was fine. A few distant relatives began to distance themselves when we sent out the last RSVP. Don't argue. Nothing except calm quietness. No messages were answered. No calls were returned. They obviously didn't want to get engaged in any disputes. However, others privately contacted us to express their support for our efforts. Some even expressed gratitude to us for defending boundaries that they had never been able to draw in their own homes. In the last few weeks, Caroline's parents took full responsibility. All vendor coordination was done by her father. Her mother assisted with last-minute food changes and oversaw the seating plan. When an allergy struck one of our visitors, that week Caroline didn't have to respond to any logistics emails. They relieved her of all burdens. Then came a second letter. Our PO was involved. Box on a brown envelope with simple calligraphy and no return address. The note within, however, was not typed. I recognized the handwriting style from years of birthday cards and lists of passive-aggressive words affixed to the refrigerator. The handwriting was that of my mother. It was a non-threatening letter. It was merely pleading. Before it's too late, I would like to have one final conversation, expressing their desire to make things right and how much they missed us. How they would welcome us in any form if we simply returned. I sent it to our lawyer after scanning it. It was added to the file by him. It was another violation of the standing no-contact boundary, according to our therapist. To commemorate the previous year, the restraining order process got formally underway. The disarray, the development, the choice to leave. Together, we made a brief video. Not for family, not for social media. We spent a few peaceful minutes in our living room discussing what unconditional love looks like. Before the ceremony began, we gave it to our planner to play on a flash drive that we had stored. Only our voices, no elaborate production. Caroline began to have sleep problems. She claimed that she kept having dreams in which they appeared smiling, well-dressed, and as if nothing had happened. We chose not to take the chance. To protect the vineyard entry in the parking lot, we engaged a seasoned security company with 2 plainclothes officers. We wouldn't even need to consider it on the day because our planner worked directly with them. Someone then discovered an online wedding registry in our names 5 days before to the wedding. The website had a list of gifts we hadn't chosen a different date and a different location. It was all a lie. We discovered links to it circulating in a community bulletin page associated with our former area and an old family Facebook group. My sister discovered the IP used to construct it by running a trace. The registry was situated in Colorado, just outside the town where our parents lived. After being reported for fraud, the registry was removed after a day. We didn't discuss it with anyone, not even to the visitors. After flagging screenshots and adding it to the legal folder, we simply went on. The air was quiet and the sky remained clear on the wedding day. There were 20 persons present. They're all on time. No disruptions. The parking lot is free of strangers. No surprises or last-minute packages. When we arrived, we received a silent thumbs up from the security crew, and the coordinator made sure everything went smoothly. There was silence during the ceremony. Other than the strings we rented, there was no music, only the remarks that we wrote ourselves. Just before we walked down the aisle, the video was played. And then there was a constant excitement in the room, despite the fact that nobody clapped or sobbed. Be calm, concentrated, nice. I made a brief toast at the reception. I didn't discuss who wasn't there or the past. I just got to my feet, took Caroline's hand, and spoke in a single statement. I feel recognized for the first time in my life for who I truly am, rather than what other people thought I should be. We got back from our honeymoon 2 months after the wedding and found a peaceful routine. We cooked at home, went for nighttime walks, stayed offline most of the time, and concentrated on what we had created. Not only the union, but also the tranquility surrounding it. In the cabinet, the legal file remained closed. We stopped continuously inspecting them, but the camera remained on. After more than a year for the first time, nothing was there to answer. Then a parcel showed up at my office. This one had been hand-delivered secretly by someone avoiding cameras in contrast to the other blocks. Without a return address, it was left at the front desk. A white cotton baby onesie with fresh tags still attached across the front that stated "Future Healer" like mommy was inside. The envelope contained no card, no invoice, and nothing else. The footage was scanned by the front desk. Someone with sunglasses and a hood had left it. Nobody knew who they were. Our lawyer didn't think twice. In an attempt to expedite the restraining order, he submitted an emergency request. In development already. This was no longer indirect. This was the aim, and it went beyond all of our delineated boundaries. The order was issued in 2 weeks. All physical, digital, and third-party communications were covered. Legal action would follow any subsequent attempts to get in touch either directly or through a third party. Every organization that was involved, including Caroline's school system, the wedding vendors, and our places of employment, received a certified copy. My office's security staff noted it and marked our names in the system. My sister called to alert us in the interim. Caroline had tricked me into shutting everyone off from a news article that our parents had begun to propagate. They said she had poisoned my perception to fit her own purpose and cut me off from the family. They claimed that in order to get her hooks in, she pretended to be helpful. The plot was set up to make her the mastermind and them the victims. One of my cousins messaged me a few days later to inform me that they were quitting the family group chat. It had become a forum for lengthy remarks about treachery rants and conspiracy theories. Almost all of the messages mentioned me by name, but none of them asked how I was really doing. More people used Caroline's name than mine. We took a notebook and sat on the patio that evening. I wasn't asked to write a letter by Caroline. It doesn't have to go anyplace, she remarked, simply sliding the notebook over. However, you ought to say it for yourself only once. I spent 2 hours writing, not to them, not to protect myself, merely to express what I was unable to say. I used to write as a child about how I waited for praise that never came and how it wasn't love at all to be loved, just when I looked the way they wanted me to. I wrote about how they made noise when I tried to leave and remained silent when I needed help. I filled each page. After I was done, I went to the backyard, folded the pages, and threw them in the fire pit. As they burnt, Caroline stood next to me. Slowly and cleanly, the smoke spiraled upward. We began looking at Portland homes 2 weeks later. It's where Caroline's extended family resides. Individuals that have supported us throughout the entire process. Her uncle assisted us with scheduling showings. In the event that we required a bridging loan, her cousin volunteered to co-sign. We looked at homes with spacious porches, peaceful surroundings, and genuine seclusion. I received a job offer from a company I had met at a convention. They inquired whether I would be interested in joining their Portland team after seeing my work online. There was no better time to do it. Before the end of the week, I agreed. I didn't feel like I was running for once. It was like making a personal choice. A few days later, Caroline was hired as a teacher. It was at a school that prioritized student welfare and community-based learning, exactly the type of work she enjoyed. To greet her, the principal personally gave her a call. We were assisted in packing by her parents. Storage bins were brought over by her aunt. Nobody questioned. They simply arrived. Then a last message got through, sent using outdated vendor contact forms from a mass email address. They must be able to access previous correspondence. It originated from a wedding provider we worked with. A message from my parents asking the vendor if they had Caroline's updated contact information was attached to the email thread, which was inadvertently transmitted during a usual follow-up. They claimed to be waiting for her to return after learning the truth. We forwarded the correspondence to our lawyer. He submitted the restraining order's last addendum. The case was closed with that message. No loopholes or appeals would exist. In treatment, the door was fully and legally closed. I spoke something that until then I had been unable to say aloud. Not leaving was the most difficult thing. It was coming to terms with the fact that I was valuable and that I didn't need to sacrifice myself in order to obtain serenity. Caroline and I strolled through our new neighborhood on our first night in Portland. We went by a park full of laughing children, a farmer's market, and a bookshop. We didn't communicate much. I didn't feel like a different version of myself created to win over someone else for the first time. Finally, I felt like myself.